I never knew silence could be so loud until I watched my brother's facade crumble, revealing a stranger beneath. The words seemed to echo in the stillness of the room, hanging like a dense fog after Marla's venomous attack on our mother, Elaine. Her lips curled into a smirk as she taunted, "You're just too meek and insignificant to stand up for yourself." I glanced at Everett, my brother, expecting him to defend our gentle mother, but he remained impassive. A hollow shell of the man I once knew. It was as if Marla's venom had seeped into his veins, numbing him to her cruelty. Rage boiled within me, and I found myself stepping forward, fists clenched. "How dare you speak to her that way?" I spat, my voice trembling with fury. Marla's eyes narrowed, and she sneered. "Stay out of this, Cadence. It doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't," I roared, closing the distance between us. "That's my mother you're berating, and I won't stand for it." Everett finally stirred, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Cadence, please, let it go." I shrugged him off, incredulous. "Let it go? Are you hearing yourself? She's treating Mom like garbage, and you're just letting it happen." Marla's laughter cut through the tension like a knife. "Poor, pathetic Elaine. She's lucky I even bother with her." She turned to Everett, her voice dripping with saccharine venom. "You see how she is, darling? Always needing to be coddled and fawned over." Everett's gaze dropped, and he nodded meekly, like a puppy being scolded. My heart broke for the brother I once knew, the confident, caring man who would have never tolerated such abuse. "Enough!" I roared, stepping between them. "I don't know what kind of twisted game you're playing, Marla, but it ends now. You will treat my mother with respect, or you can pack your bags and leave." Marla's eyes with fury, and for a moment I thought she might strike me. But then, as quickly as the storm had gathered, it dissipated, and she offered a sickly sweet smile. "Of course, Cadence, you're absolutely right. I'll be sure to watch my tongue around dear Elaine from now on." She swept past me, brushing my shoulder with hers as she exited the room. Everett followed her like a lost puppy, leaving me alone with my stunned mother. I gathered her into my arms, feeling her frail body tremble with silent sobs. "It's okay, Mom," I murmured, stroking her graying hair. "I won't let her hurt you anymore." As I held her close, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Marla's true nature had been revealed, and I knew in my heart that I had to protect my family, no matter the cost. The next few days were like walking on eggshells, each interaction fraught with tension. Marla's saccharine smiles were laced with venom, and Everett remained a hollow shell, refusing to acknowledge the rift that had formed. It wasn't until I stopped by Mom's house unannounced that the full extent of Marla's villainy became apparent. "Mom?" I called out as I stepped inside, taken aback by the unusual disarray. Dishes were piled high in the sink, and the floors were in desperate need of a vacuum. "In here, dear," came her weary voice from the living room. I found her slumped in her favorite armchair, a blanket draped over her lap as she knitted what appeared to be a scarf. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes, and her movements were slow and labored. "Mom, are you all right?" I asked, crossing the room to her side. She offered a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, darling. Just a bit tired, that's all." I frowned, taking in her disheveled appearance and the state of the house. "Have you been cooking and cleaning for Everett and Marla again?" Her gaze dropped, and she nodded almost imperceptibly. White-hot anger flared within me. "That's it. I'm putting a stop to this right now." Before she could protest, I was out the door and marching down the street towards Everett's place. I pounded on the door, barely containing my fury. Everett answered, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Cadence? What's going on?" "What's going on?" I echoed, jabbing a finger into his chest. "Your wife is running my mother ragged. That's what's going on." His eyes widened, and he glanced over his shoulder as if afraid Marla might overhear. "Keep your voice down," he hissed, stepping outside and pulling the door shut behind him. "I won't keep my voice down," I shouted, uncaring of who might hear. "Mom is exhausted, Everett. She's cooking, cleaning, and running herself into the ground just to keep Marla happy." He ran a hand over his face, his expression pained. I know. But Marla, she gets upset if things aren't just so." I stared at him, aghast. "Are you hearing yourself? You're letting her walk all over Mom because she throws a tantrum if she doesn't get her way?" Everett's shoulders slumped, and he dropped his gaze. It's not that simple, Cadence. Marla, she has a way of making things difficult if I don't go along with what she wants. My hands balled into fists at my sides. So what, you're just going to let her bully and manipulate all of us? Stand up for yourself, Everett. Stand up for our family. His jaw clenched, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the brother I once knew. But then, just as quickly, it was gone, and he shook his head wearily. I can't, Cadence. I'm sorry. With those words, he retreated back into the house, leaving me seething on the doorstep. As I stormed away, I knew that this was only the beginning. Marla's twisted grip on my family was tightening, and I had to find a way to break it before it was too late. Frustration gnawed at me in the days that followed. Everett's submission to Marla's twisted demands was like watching a man slowly drown, and I knew I had to act before it was too late. We need to find out more about her. I told Theo one evening as we prepared dinner. My husband's brow furrowed, but he nodded, sensing the resolve in my voice. That night, after the dishes were done, we began our search. Scouring the internet for any trace of Marla's past, we slowly pieced together a disturbing pattern. Look at this, Theo murmured, his eyes glued to the screen. It seems Marla was briefly married to a wealthy businessman a few years back. But the marriage only lasted 6 months before he filed for divorce, citing emotional distress and manipulation. I leaned closer, my heart sinking as I read the details. And here's another. She was engaged to a prominent lawyer, but he broke it off after discovering she'd been lying about her background and finances. Page after page painted a chilling portrait of a woman who thrived on deceit and exploitation. Marla would charm and seduce wealthy men, leeching off their fortunes until they inevitably saw through her facade. Then she would move on to her next target, leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts in her wake. She's a black widow, I whispered, feeling ill, and Everett is her latest victim. Theo squeezed my hand, his expression grim. We have to show him, Cadence. We have to make him see the truth before it's too late. I nodded, my jaw set with determination. The next day, I invited Everett over under the guise of a casual family dinner. As we sat around the table, I could see the tension in his posture, the way his eyes kept flicking towards the door, as if he expected Marla to burst in at any moment. Everett, I began, keeping my voice level. We need to talk about Marla. He stiffened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the table. What about her? I took a steadying breath and launched into the details we'd uncovered, the string of failed marriages and broken engagements, the pattern of exploitation and deceit. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from Everett's face. He shook his head vehemently, his eyes wide with denial. No, you've got it all wrong. Marla would never. But the evidence was irrefutable, and with each new revelation, I could see the cracks in his facade deepening. Finally, when I had laid bare the full extent of Marla's machinations, Everett slumped in his chair, burying his face in his hands. How could I have been so blind? He whispered, his voice thick with anguish. I reached across the table, resting my hand on his arm. It's not too late, Everett. We can stop her before she destroys our family. He lifted his head, and I saw a flicker of the old Everett, the fierce determination that had once burned so brightly. You're right, he said, his jaw set. It's time to end this. As we began to formulate our plan, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The veil had been lifted, and now it was time to take back control from the woman who had wrought so much pain and misery. The confrontation with Marla was like a powder keg waiting to ignite. Everett and I had agreed to approach her together, our united front bolstered by the damning evidence we'd uncovered. I could sense Everett's trepidation as we stood on the doorstep of his home, but there was a newfound determination in his eyes that filled me with hope. Marla answered the door, her perfectly coiffed hair and immaculate makeup a stark contrast to the sneer that twisted her features. Well, if it isn't the dynamic duo, she drawled, her gaze flickering between us with thinly veiled disdain. To what do I owe the pleasure? Cut the act, Marla, I spat, pushing past her into the house. We know what you've been up to. Her brows shot up, but her expression remained infuriatingly smug. And what, pray tell, have I been up to? Everett stepped forward, squaring his shoulders. We know about your past, Marla. The marriages, the engagements, all the men you've manipulated and exploited for their money. For a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a derisive laugh. "Oh, Everett, you can't possibly believe these ridiculous accusations, can you?" She sidled up to him, trailing a manicured hand down his arm. "Your sister is just jealous, darling. She's always resented our happiness." I opened my mouth to protest, but Everett held up a hand, his gaze boring into hers. "Don't bother, Marla," he said, his voice low and steady. "We have proof, documents, records, testimonies from your past victims. It's over." Her eyes narrowed to slits, and for the first time I saw the true depths of her malice laid bare. "You ungrateful wretch," she hissed, her words dripping with venom. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" Everett remained unmoved, his jaw set in a firm line. "You've done nothing but lie and manipulate, Marla. It ends now." With a snarl of rage, she turned on me, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my arm as she grabbed me. "This is all you're doing, you meddling bitch," she spat, her face contorted in fury. "You're just jealous that your pathetic life will never measure up to mine." Before I could react, Everett had wedged himself between us, his hands gripping Marla's wrists as he pried her away. "That's enough," he growled, his eyes blazing with a fire I hadn't seen in years. "You're done manipulating this family, Marla. It's over." She struggled against his grip, her eyes wild with desperation. "You'll regret this, Everett," she shrieked. "I'll make sure you lose everything, your job, your money, your precious family." But her threats rang hollow, her carefully constructed facade lying in shattered pieces at our feet. As Everett hauled her towards the door, she turned her vitriol on me once more. "You think you've won?" she snarled. "This is far from over, Cadence. Mark my words, you'll pay for this." And with that, she was gone, her angry screams echoing down the street as Everett slammed the door behind her. We stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of what had transpired hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Everett turned to me, his expression a mixture of shame and gratitude. "Thank you," he murmured, pulling me into a fierce embrace. "You saved me from a lifetime of misery." As I held him, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph amidst the turmoil. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Marla's threats still lingered, a reminder that her vindictive nature knew no bounds. But in that moment, with my brother by my side once more, I knew we could weather any storm she threw our way. The family she had tried so desperately to fracture was now stronger than ever, and we would face her wrath together, united and unbreakable. In the days following Marla's explosive departure, a fragile peace settled over our family. Everett seemed lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders, but I knew better than to let my guard down. Marla's parting threat still echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was biding her time, plotting her next move. So when Theo came to me one evening, his expression grim, I steeled myself for the worst. "Cadence," he began, settling beside me on the couch. "I think we have a problem." My heart dropped, and I braced myself for whatever bombshell he was about to unleash. "I just got off the phone with your dad," he continued. "Apparently, Marla has been pressuring Everett to sell the family home." A chill ran down my spine as the implication sank in. The house wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of our family's legacy, a place where countless memories had been forged. "She's trying to isolate him," I murmured, my hands clenching into fists. "Strip away everything that ties him to us so she can worm her way back in." Theo nodded grimly. "Your dad said Everett has been reluctant, but Marla is relentless. She's playing on his guilt, telling him it's the only way to make a fresh start." White-hot anger surged through me, and I shot to my feet, pacing the length of the living room. "That conniving snake," I spat. "After everything she's done, she still has the audacity to try and tear our family apart." Theo caught my arm, pulling me to a halt. "Cadence, we have to do something. If she succeeds in getting Everett to sell the house, it'll be that much harder to break her hold over him." I took a deep breath, tamping down the fury that threatened to consume me. Theo was right. We needed a plan, a way to make Everett see the truth before it was too late. "Call Dad," I said, my voice steely with resolve. "Tell him we're staging an intervention tonight. It's time to put an end to Marla's games once and for all." A few hours later, we were gathered in the living room of the family home. Mom, Dad, Everett, Theo, and myself. The tension was thick, Everett's eyes darting toward the exits as if he expected Marla to burst through the door at any moment. "What's this all about?" he demanded, his gaze finally landing on me. I took a steadying breath, squaring my shoulders. "It's about Marla," I said, holding his gaze, "and her latest attempt to manipulate you into selling this house." His eyes widened and he opened his mouth to protest, but I forged ahead. "Don't try to deny it, Everett. We know she's been pressuring you, playing on your guilt and insecurities. But can't you see? This is just another ploy to isolate you from your family, to make you dependent on her again." Everett's jaw clenched, and he shook his head vehemently. "You're wrong, Cadence. Marla just wants what's best for us, a fresh start away from all the drama and conflict." I scoffed, feeling the frustration mount. "Wake up, Everett. She's the one causing all the drama and conflict. She's a toxic parasite, and she'll never stop until she's drained every last ounce of life from this family." The words hung heavy in the air, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw Mom rise from her chair, her face etched with a determination I'd never seen before. "Your sister is right, Everett," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "That woman's caused nothing but pain and misery since the day she wormed her way into our lives." She crossed the room, laying a hand on his arm. "This house is our home, our legacy. Please don't let her take that away from us." Everett's gaze flickered between us, his expression a whirlwind of emotions. I could see the battle raging within him, the struggle between Marla's poisonous influence and the love for his family. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "You're right," he whispered, his voice thick with shame. "I've been so blind, so desperate to make things work with Marla that I've nearly lost everything that truly matters." He looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I won't let her win, not this time. The house stays, and Marla—" He swallowed hard. "Marla is out of our lives for good." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The battle had been hard fought, but in the end, love and loyalty had prevailed over Marla's twisted machinations. As we gathered around Everett, enveloping him in an embrace, I knew that our family was finally on the path to healing. The shadows that had lingered for so long were fading, and a new dawn was on the horizon. One where Marla's poisonous influence could no longer reach us. The day of Mom's birthday celebration dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm that was brewing beneath the surface. As I helped her prepare for the party, arranging platters of her famous lemon bars and hanging streamers, I couldn't shake the sense of anticipation that buzzed through my veins. This was it. The culmination of weeks of planning, the moment when we would finally expose Marla's true nature to the world and break her hold over Everett once and for all. "You seem tense, dear," Mom murmured, laying a gentle hand on my arm. "Is everything all right?" I forced a smile, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Everything's fine, Mom. Just want to make sure your party is perfect." She returned my smile, her eyes shining with affection. "As long as my family is here, it will be." As the guests began to arrive, the house filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation, a temporary reprieve from the turmoil that had plagued us for far too long. Everett arrived with a hesitant smile, his gaze constantly flicking towards the door as if expecting Marla to make an appearance. "It's going to be all right," I murmured, pulling him aside. "We're going to put an end to her lies once and for all." He nodded, his jaw set with determination, and rejoined the party. As the afternoon wore on, I could feel the tension mounting, the calm before the storm. Finally, when the last of the guests had arrived, I caught Theo's eye and gave him a subtle nod. It was time. Clearing my throat, I clinked my glass, calling for silence. "If I could have everyone's attention, please." The room gradually fell quiet, all eyes turning towards me with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. "First and foremost," I began, "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate my incredible mother on her birthday." A smattering of applause rippled through the crowd, and Mom ducked her head shyly, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "However," I continued, my voice growing steely, "there is another reason we've gathered you all here today." I locked eyes with Everett, giving him a subtle nod of encouragement before turning my attention back to the assembled guests. For far too long, a dark shadow has loomed over this family, a poisonous presence that has sought to divide and manipulate us for her own selfish gain. My gaze swept over the crowd, daring anyone to look away. I'm speaking, of course, about Marla. A hush fell over the room, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Everett tense, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the back of a chair. Marla has woven a tangled web of lies and deceit, I pressed on, my voice ringing with conviction. She has exploited and preyed upon my brother, leeching off his fortune and manipulating him into cutting ties with those who truly care about him. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the crowd, but I forged ahead, laying bare the evidence we had gathered, the trail of broken engagements and failed marriages, the testimonies from her past victims. As I spoke, I could see the shock and revulsion etched on the faces of our guests, the realization sinking in that they had been duped by Marla's carefully constructed facade. Finally, when every last sordid detail had been exposed, I turned my gaze to Everett, who stood frozen, his eyes wide with a mixture of shame and relief. "It's over, Everett," I said softly. "You're free of her poison." For a long moment he remained motionless, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Then, slowly, he straightened his shoulders, his features hardening with a newfound resolve. "You're right, Cadence," he said, his voice ringing out across the hushed room. "It's over." Turning on his heel, he strode towards the front door, throwing it open with a resounding bang, and there, frozen on the doorstep with a look of abject horror painted across her features, stood Marla. "You," she sputtered, her perfectly manicured mask cracking as she took in the scene before her. "You can't do this to me." But her protests fell on deaf ears as Everett advanced, his eyes blazing with a fire I hadn't seen in years. "Get out," he growled, his words laced with a finality that brooked no argument. "You're not welcome here. Not anymore." For a beat, Marla seemed poised to argue, her mouth opening and closing like a gasping fish. But as her gaze swept over the sea of accusatory stares, she must have realized the futility of her situation. With a cry of outrage, she whirled on her heel and stormed off into the night, her heels clicking angrily on the pavement as she disappeared from sight. A deafening silence hung in her wake, punctuated only by the occasional murmur or cough. Then, slowly, the tension began to dissipate, replaced by a collective sigh of relief. As I looked around at the faces of my family and friends, I saw nothing but pride and support reflected back at me. We had faced down the darkness that had threatened to consume us, and emerged victorious, battered perhaps, but unbroken. And as Everett turned to me, his eyes shining with unshed tears, I knew that our journey towards healing had truly begun. In the days that followed Marla's explosive banishment from our lives, a palpable shift seemed to ripple through our family. It was as if a great weight had been lifted, a toxic cloud of negativity and manipulation that had hung over us for far too long. Everett, in particular, seemed to undergo a profound transformation. Gone was the haunted, hollow-eyed man who had been so thoroughly cowed by Marla's venom. In his place stood a man reborn, his shoulders squared and his gaze clear and focused. "It's like waking from a nightmare," he confided in me one evening as we sat on the porch, sipping lemonade and basking in the warm evening air. All this time, I was living in a fog, blind to the truth and trapped by her lies. I reached over, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. "You're free of her now, Everett. We all are." He nodded, his expression solemn. "I just wish I had seen it sooner, before she had the chance to inflict so much pain and damage." A familiar pang of guilt twisted in my gut, but I pushed it aside. Dwelling on regrets would only hold us back from truly healing. "The important thing is that we made it through," I said firmly, "and now we can focus on rebuilding and moving forward as a family." Everett smiled, the weight of Marla's lingering specter seeming to lift from his shoulders. "You're right. It's a new beginning for all of us." As the days stretched into weeks, the true extent of Marla's deception began to unravel. It seemed that her pattern of exploitation and manipulation had cast a wide net, ensnaring countless victims over the years. One by one they emerged from the shadows, emboldened by the news of her downfall and eager to share their stories. Tales of emotional abuse, financial ruin, and shattered lives poured forth, painting a chilling portrait of a woman utterly devoid of conscience or remorse. The fallout was swift and merciless. Marla's carefully constructed house of cards came crashing down around her, leaving her social standing in tatters, and her once abundant finances drained to the dregs. Through it all, Everett remained a pillar of strength, weathering the storm with a newfound resilience that inspired us all. Gone was the guilt and shame that had once weighed him down. In its place was a steely determination to make amends and move forward. "I can't change the past," he said during one of our many heart-to-heart conversations, "but I can damn well make sure the future is better for all of us." And true to his word, he did. With an unwavering focus, he set about rebuilding the relationships that Marla had so callously fractured, starting with our parents. It was a long and often painful process, fraught with difficult conversations and emotional revelations. But through it all, our family remained united, a bond forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by our shared determination to triumph over Marla's poisonous legacy. As for my role, I took it upon myself to be the mediator, the calm voice of reason that helped guide our family through the turbulent waters of healing. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when tempers flared and progress seemed elusive. But I persevered, drawing strength from the knowledge that we were finally on the right path, a path that led away from the shadows and towards the light of a brighter future. And as the weeks turned into months, that future began to take shape before our very eyes. The rifts that had once seemed insurmountable slowly knitted themselves together, replaced by a newfound appreciation for the unbreakable bonds that tied us as a family. It was during one of our Sunday dinners, the table laden with Mom's famous pot roast, and the air filled with laughter and conversation, that I truly realized how far we had come. Gazing around at the smiling faces of my loved ones, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. We had weathered the storm, emerging battered but unbroken, our love and loyalty to one another stronger than ever before. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. A united front, fortified by the knowledge that the darkness that had once threatened to consume us had finally been banished for good. In the aftermath of Marla's explosive departure, a fragile peace settled over our family. It was as if we had all been holding our collective breath, bracing for the next inevitable blow from her twisted machinations. But as the days stretched into weeks and her poisonous presence faded into a distant memory, we slowly began to exhale. Of course, the road to healing was far from smooth. Marla's betrayal had left deep scars, both emotional and financial. Everett, in particular, struggled with the fallout of her deceit, his once thriving business and personal accounts drained to the dregs by her relentless exploitation. "I feel like such a fool," he confided in me one evening, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "How could I have been so blind, so willing to hand over everything I've worked for to that parasite?" I wrapped an arm around his shoulders, offering what comfort I could. "You were manipulated, Everett. She preyed on your trust and twisted your devotion into a weapon against you. But that's over now." He nodded, his jaw clenched with determination. "You're right. It's time to start rebuilding, to take back what she stole from me, from all of us." And rebuild we did, each of us shouldering a share of the burden. Mom and Dad opened their home to Everett, offering him a sanctuary as he sorted through the tangled mess of his finances. Theo, ever the level-headed voice of reason, helped devise a plan to get Everett's business back on track, utilizing his keen business acumen to plug the leaks and stem the tide of financial ruin. As for me, I became the glue that held our fractured family together. I organized weekly dinners, ensuring we all had a regular opportunity to come together and reconnect. I mediated the difficult conversations, lending an understanding ear and offering gentle guidance when tempers flared. It wasn't easy, and there were times when the strain of it all threatened to overwhelm me. But whenever I felt myself wavering, I would think back to those dark days when Marla's poisonous grip had nearly torn us apart, and I would find the strength to persevere. Slowly but surely the cracks began to mend, and our family emerged from the rubble stronger than ever before. Everett's business flourished under Theo's guidance, and he was able to regain his financial footing, a newfound humility and appreciation for the value of hard work shining through. Mom and Dad, too, seemed rejuvenated by the renewed sense of unity that bound us together. Gone were the hollow-eyed resignation and strained silences that had plagued them during Marla's reign of terror. In their place was a warmth and vibrancy that I hadn't seen in years, a reminder of the unbreakable bonds that had sustained our family through countless storms. And as for me, well, I found myself reinvigorated by the knowledge that my unwavering determination had played a pivotal role in our family's salvation. No longer was I content to be a mere bystander in life, watching from the sidelines as others shaped their destinies. I had tasted the power of taking action, of standing up for what was right, and I knew that I could never go back to the way things were before. It was this newfound sense of purpose that drove me to take on a new challenge: the restoration of our family home. The once proud manor had fallen into disrepair during Marla's toxic tenure, its rooms and halls battered by neglect and the weight of her corrosive presence. But now, with her shadow banished and our family united, I saw an opportunity to breathe new life into the heart of our legacy. Enlisting the help of Everett and Theo, we set about the task of restoring the grand old house to its former glory, stripping away the layers of grime and decay to reveal the beauty that had been hidden beneath. It was backbreaking work, filled with long hours and more than a few heated arguments. But through it all, we persevered, fueled by a shared sense of purpose and the knowledge that every nail hammered, every wall sanded, was a tangible symbol of our family's resilience and rebirth. And when the final coat of paint had dried and the last piece of furniture had been carefully arranged, we stood back and marveled at our handiwork. The house fairly glowed, its polished floors and gleaming woodwork a testament to the power of perseverance and love. It was on a warm summer evening, the air thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers, that we gathered on the front porch to celebrate our victory. Mom and Dad, hand in hand, their faces aglow with pride. Everett and Theo, shoulders brushing as they shared a conspiratorial grin. And me, standing in the midst of it all, my heart swelling with a sense of triumph and unbridled joy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, I raised my glass in a silent toast. To family, to resilience, and to the unbreakable bonds that had carried us through the darkest of storms. For in that moment, bathed in the warmth of the fading light, and surrounded by the people I loved most in this world, I knew that we had truly emerged from the shadows, battered, perhaps, but unbroken and more united than ever before. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with new challenges and obstacles to overcome. But as I looked around at the smiling faces of my loved ones, I felt a surge of confidence and determination. Whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. A family forged in the fires of adversity, tempered by the knowledge that our love and loyalty to one another was unshakable. Marla's poisonous legacy had been purged, and in its place a new chapter was beginning. One written in the bonds of unbreakable family, resilience, and hope for a brighter tomorrow. I couldn't believe my ears. As I mingled with relatives at the family reunion, I overheard Rick, my brother-in-law, snickering with his friends. "Once I get that idiot sister-in-law out of the way, the family business will be all ours." A sinking feeling gripped my stomach. Rick had always been arrogant, but I never imagined he harbored such malicious intentions against me. I glanced across the room at my husband, Alan, laughing with his parents, oblivious to the venom spewing from his own brother's mouth. Later that evening, as Alan and I tucked our son, Oliver, into bed, I found myself at a loss for words. How could I shatter the illusion of our perfect family? Oliver's innocent eyes brimmed with love, and I couldn't bring myself to burden his young mind with the harsh reality. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle shifts in Alan's behavior. He grew more distant, often lost in thought, and our once effortless conversations became strained. I couldn't help but wonder if Rick had already planted seeds of doubt about me. One night, Alan broke the news that shook me to my core. "My parents think it's a good idea to invest in Rick's new venture. He's got a solid business plan, and they believe it could be a game-changer for the family." I tried to reason with him, expressing my concerns about Rick's motives, but my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Alan's unwavering trust in his family blinded him to the potential consequences of such a risky investment. As the weeks passed, the strain between us intensified. Oliver, ever perceptive, picked up on the tension, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a somber silence. I couldn't bear to see my once happy family crumbling before my eyes. Desperate for answers, I confided in my closest friend, Samantha. Her unwavering support and objective perspective provided the clarity I needed. Together, we began gathering evidence of Rick's past misdeeds, slowly unraveling the web of lies he had carefully constructed. With each damning piece of information we uncovered, my resolve grew stronger. I knew I had to confront Rick, to expose his true nature before he succeeded in tearing my family apart. The stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. But I was determined to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. In the following weeks, Rick's influence over my in-laws grew stronger. He painted me as a manipulative outsider, hell-bent on undermining the family's legacy. With each conversation, his poisonous words eroded their trust in me. "Marla's been filling your head with nonsense," Rick said during one of his frequent visits. "She's threatened by my success and is trying to sabotage the business deal." Alan's parents nodded solemnly, their expressions a mixture of concern and doubt. It broke my heart to see the once unshakable bond within our family fracturing. At home, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Alan, swayed by Rick's persuasive lies, became increasingly distant and argumentative. "Why can't you just support me on this?" he snapped one evening, after I voiced my reservations about the investment. "It's a fantastic opportunity, and you're letting your personal issues with Rick cloud your judgment." I recoiled at the harshness of his words, feeling helpless in the face of Rick's insidious machinations. Oliver, ever the sensitive child, retreated into himself, sensing the tension that permeated our once happy household. I ached to shield him from the turmoil, but the cracks in our family's foundation were becoming too prominent to ignore. "Dad's been acting weird lately." Oliver confided in me one night as I tucked him into bed. "Is everything okay?" I forced a reassuring smile, stroking his hair gently. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Everything will be all right." Even as the words left my lips, I felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. How could I mend what Rick had so skillfully torn apart? Desperate for a glimmer of hope, I clung to the evidence Samantha and I had gathered, determined to expose Rick's deceitful ways. But with each passing day, the task seemed more daunting, as his lies enveloped my family like a suffocating shroud. One evening, as Alan and I sat in stony silence over dinner, he dropped a bombshell that shattered what little remained of my optimism. "I've decided to go ahead with the investment," he stated flatly, avoiding my gaze. "Rick has assured me it's a solid opportunity, and my parents are fully on board." My heart sank as I realized the extent of Rick's manipulation. He had successfully driven a wedge between Alan and me, exploiting my husband's loyalty to his family for his own nefarious gains. "Alan, please," I pleaded, my voice trembling with emotion. "Can't you see what he's doing? He's using you, using all of us for his own benefit." But my words fell on deaf ears. Alan had made up his mind, and Rick's influence had taken root too deeply. As I lay awake that night, the weight of the situation bearing down on me, I knew I had to act decisively. Rick's treachery could no longer be tolerated. I would expose him, no matter the cost, and reclaim the family he had so callously sought to destroy. With Samantha's unwavering support, I doubled down on my efforts to expose Rick's true nature. We pored over financial records, scoured through emails, and followed every lead, no matter how small. Our diligence paid off when we uncovered evidence of Rick's embezzlement from the family business. Invoices for non-existent expenses, suspicious wire transfers, it was all there, meticulously documented, painting a damning picture of his greed and deceit. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I confronted Alan, determined to make him see the truth. "Rick has been stealing from the company," I stated bluntly, spreading the evidence across the kitchen table. "He's been siphoning funds for his own gain, and now he's trying to drag us all down with this bogus investment." Alan's brow furrowed as he examined the documents, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "This can't be right," he muttered, shaking his head. "Rick would never do something like this." I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face, the desire to trust his brother-in-law warring with the mounting evidence of betrayal. "Open your eyes, Alan," I pleaded, my frustration mounting. "He's been manipulating you, All of us, from the start. This is just the tip of the iceberg. For a moment, I thought I had finally gotten through to him. Alan's gaze met mine, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. But then, as if a switch had been flipped, his expression hardened. "This is just another one of your schemes," he spat, pushing the documents away. "You're so desperate to turn me against my own family that you'd resort to fabricating evidence." His words stung like a physical blow, and I recoiled at the venom in his tone. How could he still be so blind to Rick's machinations? In the days that followed, the tension in our household was palpable. Alan and I barely spoke, our interactions reduced to terse exchanges and icy glares. Oliver, sensing the rift between us, retreated further into himself, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a somber silence that broke my heart. It was during one of these strained silences that I noticed a flicker of doubt cross Alan's face. He had been studying the investment paperwork, his brow furrowed in concentration, when suddenly his eyes narrowed. "Something's not adding up," he murmured, more to himself than to me. Seizing the opportunity, I approached him cautiously, pointing out the discrepancies I had noticed. The inflated projections, the questionable financial backing, the inconsistencies in Rick's pitch. For the first time, I saw the scales begin to tip in my favor. Alan's unwavering faith in his brother-in-law wavered as the evidence mounted, and the cracks in Rick's carefully constructed facade started to show. The arguments that followed were intense, with tempers flaring and voices raised. But through it all, I clung to the hope that Alan was finally seeing the truth, that the person he had trusted implicitly was nothing more than a master manipulator driven by greed and selfishness. As the dust settled, a newfound determination took root within me. Rick's deceit would no longer be tolerated, and I would stop at nothing to expose him, even if it meant risking the fragile bonds that remained within our fractured family. The next family gathering was a tense affair, with undercurrents of mistrust and animosity simmering beneath the surface. I could feel Rick's eyes boring into me, his smug expression a silent challenge. Mustering my courage, I approached him as he mingled with his cronies, the evidence of his misdeeds clutched tightly in my hand. "We need to talk," I stated firmly, my voice carrying across the room. Rick's eyes narrowed, but he quickly plastered on a false smile. "Of course, dear sister-in-law. What seems to be the problem?" I handed him the stack of documents, my hand trembling slightly with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. "These are records of your embezzlement from the family business," I stated, my voice unwavering. "Proof of your lies and deceit." A hush fell over the room as heads turned in our direction, the weight of my accusation hanging heavy in the air. For a moment, Rick's composure faltered, his eyes widening ever so slightly, but he quickly regained his footing, letting out a dismissive chuckle. "Really, Marla? Falsifying documents now?" He shook his head, his gaze sweeping across the gathered family members. "This is just another one of her pathetic attempts to undermine me." I opened my mouth to protest, but Rick cut me off, his voice dripping with contempt. "Don't think I don't know what you're up to," he sneered, taking a step closer. "You're threatened by my success, by the respect I've earned within this family, so you resort to these petty tactics, trying to turn everyone against me." My hands clenched into fists at my sides as Rick's words washed over me, each syllable dripping with venom. I could see the doubt flickering in the eyes of my relatives, their allegiances wavering. Alan stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Marla, is this true? Have you been fabricating evidence?" The weight of his question hung in the air, and I felt the eyes of the entire room upon me. In that moment, I realized the enormity of what was at stake, not just the exposure of Rick's deceit, but the very fabric of our family's trust. Swallowing hard, I met Alan's gaze. "No," I stated firmly. "Every document, every piece of evidence is legitimate. I would never stoop to such levels." Rick scoffed, but I pressed on, my voice gaining strength with each word. "Look at the records, Alan. Look at the wire transfers, the bogus invoices. It's all there, plain as day. Rick has been stealing from the business, from our family, for years." A heavy silence blanketed the room as my words sank in, the weight of the accusation hanging thick in the air. I could see the conflict playing out on Alan's face, the struggle between his loyalty to his brother-in-law and the nagging doubts that had taken root. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. I need proof, he said, his voice low and measured. Concrete, irrefutable proof of what you're claiming. A surge of determination coursed through me. If proof was what he needed, then proof I would give him. You'll have it, I promised, my gaze unwavering. And when you do, you'll see Rick for the liar and manipulator he truly is. As the gathering dispersed, the tension lingering in the air, I knew that the battle lines had been drawn. It was time to take the gloves off and fight for the truth, no matter the cost. The tension in the air was palpable as the family gathered for the emergency meeting. Accusations had been hurled, loyalties tested, and the once solid foundation of our clan had started to crumble. Rick strode into the room, his cocky demeanor a stark contrast to the somber expressions of the others. He shot me a smug glance, as if taunting me to make my next move. Alan cleared his throat, his expression grave. We're here to address the allegations made against Rick. I could feel every eye on me as I rose from my seat, clutching the recording device in my trembling hand. This was it, the moment of truth. I have proof, I announced, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. Proof of Rick's deceit and his intentions to undermine this family for his own gain. Rick scoffed, but I pressed on, hitting the play button on the recorder. His voice, smug and self-assured, filled the room. Once I get that idiot sister-in-law out of the way, the family business will be all ours. A collective gasp rippled through the room as the damning words echoed off the walls. I watched as the color drained from Rick's face, his mask of arrogance slipping away. That's not what it sounds like, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room in desperation. But the recording played on, each sentence a nail in the coffin of his lies. Been siphoning funds for years. Bogus investment turned the family against her. By the time the recording ended, the room was deathly silent, the weight of the truth hanging heavy in the air. All eyes were fixed on Rick, the once untouchable golden boy now exposed as a fraud and a manipulator. Alan's expression was one of utter disbelief, a mixture of anger and hurt etched onto his features. How could you? He whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Rick opened his mouth, no doubt to spew forth more lies, but Alan held up a hand, silencing him. No more, he said, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. You've done enough damage. In that moment, it was as if the scales had fallen from everyone's eyes. The web of deceit that Rick had so carefully woven was unraveling before our very eyes, and the true depths of his betrayal were laid bare. One by one, family members rose to their feet, their expressions a mixture of disgust and outrage. Even Rick's most ardent supporters couldn't deny the damning evidence. You're finished, Alan's father spat, his face twisted with anger. Get out of my sight and never show your face here again. Rick's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, his once smug demeanor reduced to a pathetic display of stammering and denial. As he was unceremoniously escorted from the room, his protests falling on deaf ears, I felt a sense of vindication wash over me. The battle had been long and hard-fought, but in the end, the truth had prevailed. Yet even as I basked in the victory, a pang of sadness tugged at my heart. This was my family, fractured and torn apart by the very person who should have been its strongest ally. The road to healing would be long and arduous, but I knew we would walk it together, stronger and wiser for the trials we had endured. As the dust settled and the adrenaline began to fade, I turned to Alan, our eyes meeting in a silent exchange of understanding and shared relief. The worst was over, but the real work was just beginning. In the aftermath of Rick's stunning downfall, the family was in turmoil. Loyalties were divided, with some still clinging to the belief that he had been wronged, while others rallied around Alan and me, determined to excise the cancer that had festered within our ranks. Rick, however, was not one to go down without a fight. Bitter and vengeful, he launched a campaign of lies and manipulation, attempting to turn the tide of opinion back in his favor. She's been plotting this from the start, he hissed to anyone who would listen. Marla's always been jealous of my success, and she saw an opportunity to take me down. His words were like poison, seeping into the minds of the more gullible family members, sowing seeds of doubt and mistrust. But I was no longer the meek, passive woman he had once dismissed. With Alan's unwavering support and the weight of the truth on my side, I pushed back against Rick's slander, countering his lies with irrefutable evidence and heartfelt pleas. "Look at the facts," I implored our relatives, laying out the paper trail of Rick's misdeeds. "He's the one who betrayed us, who put his own greed above the family's well-being." It was an uphill battle, but slowly the tide began to turn. Those who had once been swayed by Rick's silver tongue saw the truth for what it was, and their allegiance shifted back to the family's side. Still, Rick remained defiant, his desperation mounting with each blow to his crumbling facade. It was during one of these tense standoffs that he crossed a line, threatening me with veiled implications of violence. "You'll regret this," he snarled, his face twisted with rage. "No one crosses me and gets away with it." I stood my ground, refusing to be intimidated by his hollow threats. But Alan, ever the protector, would not let such an affront go unanswered. In a blur of motion, he lunged forward, grabbing Rick by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "Don't you ever threaten her again," he growled, his face inches from Rick's. "Or I swear, I'll make you regret the day you were born." The raw fury in Alan's voice sent a chill down my spine, but I couldn't deny the swell of pride and love I felt in that moment. This was the man I had married, strong, loyal, and fiercely protective of those he loved. Rick, for once, was rendered speechless, his bravado crumbling in the face of Alan's righteous anger. It was a pivotal moment, a symbolic shifting of power that left no doubt as to who held the moral high ground. As Alan released his grip, Rick slunk away, his tail firmly between his legs. It was a humiliating defeat, witnessed by those who had once revered him as the golden child. In the days that followed, the family rallied around us, offering their support and condemnation of Rick's actions. The once fractured clan was slowly mending, united in their determination to move forward and leave the toxic legacy of betrayal behind. Yet, even as the dust settled and a sense of normalcy began to return, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rick's story was not yet over. He was a cornered animal, backed into a corner of his own making, and I knew from experience that such creatures were capable of lashing out with desperate, unpredictable fury. But I was no longer afraid. With Alan by my side and the truth as our shield, we were ready to face whatever Rick threw our way. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. With Rick's deceit exposed and his influence over the family shattered, Alan and I turned our focus to restoring order and trust within the business. It was a daunting task, made all the more challenging by the lingering doubts and divisions that Rick's machinations had sown. We pored over financial records, untangling the web of lies and cover-ups that had been woven over the years. Each discrepancy, each hidden transaction, was like a dagger to the heart, a stark reminder of the depth of Rick's betrayal. As the true extent of the damage became clear, Alan's parents struggled with a deep sense of guilt and shame. How could they have been so blind to the deceit unfolding right under their noses? "We trusted him implicitly," Alan's mother confessed, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "He was family, and we never imagined he could be capable of such treachery." It was a sentiment echoed by many, a collective reckoning with the harsh reality that even those closest to us can harbor the darkest of intentions. But through it all, Alan and I remained steadfast in our resolve to rebuild what had been torn asunder. We held meetings, both formal and informal, to address the lingering concerns and doubts that had taken root. With patience and understanding, we listened to the grievances of those who had been swayed by Rick's lies, offering reassurance and a path forward. It was a slow and often frustrating process, but gradually the cracks began to mend. Trust, once shattered, was painstakingly rebuilt, one honest conversation at a time. As the business stabilized, we turned our attention to the legal ramifications of Rick's actions. With the evidence we had gathered, the authorities had no choice but to pursue charges for embezzlement and fraud. The day Rick was taken into custody, a hush fell over the family. There was no joy, no sense of triumph, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. Family bonds, once cherished, had been irreparably severed by greed and deceit. In the aftermath, we sought solace in professional counseling, recognizing the need for outside guidance to navigate the complex emotions and trauma we had endured. It was a humbling experience, but one that ultimately brought us closer together as a family. During one particularly poignant session, Alan's father broke down, his stoic facade crumbling as he confronted the depth of his own culpability. "I should have seen it," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have protected you all from his poisonous influence." In that moment, I felt a profound sense of empathy wash over me. For all the pain and turmoil Rick had caused, he was still a part of this family, and his actions had left wounds that would take time and care to heal. As the weeks turned to months, a sense of normalcy began to return, tempered by a newfound appreciation for the bonds that had been tested and ultimately strengthened. Alan and I found ourselves drawing closer than ever, united in our shared triumph over adversity. It was during this period of healing and growth that we made the decision to renew our vows, a symbolic gesture of our unwavering commitment to one another and to the family we had fought so hard to protect. As I stood before Alan, surrounded by the loved ones who had weathered the storm alongside us, I felt a profound sense of gratitude and hope. The road had been long and arduous, but we had emerged from the crucible of betrayal stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. In the months following our vow renewal, the family business began to thrive once more, the dark cloud of Rick's deceit finally lifting. With honesty and transparency at the helm, we regained the trust of our partners and clients, and the company's reputation was restored. Yet, even as we celebrated our professional successes, there was a deeper, more personal victory that filled me with a profound sense of gratitude. The strength of our family bonds forged anew in the crucible of adversity. Gone were the days of whispered secrets and veiled accusations. In their place was a newfound openness, a commitment to communication and understanding that had been sorely lacking before. I would often catch Alan's parents sharing a knowing glance, their eyes shining with a mix of pride and relief. They had come perilously close to losing everything they held dear, and the lessons learned had left an indelible mark. "We're lucky to have you, Marla," Alan's mother confided one evening as we sipped tea on the patio. "If it weren't for your strength and perseverance, who knows where we'd be right now?" Her words, spoken with such sincerity, brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I had felt like an outsider, forever seeking acceptance and validation within this family. Now, at last, I felt truly seen and valued for who I was. Oliver, too, seemed to blossom in the newfound atmosphere of trust and stability. Gone was the somber, withdrawn child who had borne witness to the family's turmoil. In his place was a vibrant, confident young man, secure in the knowledge that the bonds that held us together were unbreakable. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he whispered one night as I tucked him into bed, his eyes shining with admiration. "You never gave up, even when things looked really bad." In that moment, I felt a surge of pride and love so intense, it threatened to overwhelm me. Through it all, the lies, the betrayal, the darkest moments when hope seemed lost, Oliver had been my guiding light, my unwavering reminder of what truly mattered. As the days turned to weeks and the weeks to months, our family settled into a new normal, one built on the hard-won lessons of the past. There were still moments of tension, of course, as old wounds took time to fully heal, but we faced them head-on, with open hearts and a willingness to truly listen and understand one another. And through it all, Alan remained my steadfast partner, my rock in the storm. His unwavering love and support had been the bedrock upon which our family's redemption was built, and I found myself falling deeper in love with him with each passing day. It was on a warm summer evening, as we sat side by side on the porch swing, watching Oliver chase fireflies in the twilight, that I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. The battles had been fought, the demons laid to rest, and we had emerged victorious, our bond stronger than ever before. "Can you believe how far we've come?" I murmured, leaning my head against Alan's shoulder. He smiled, his eyes filled with a mix of joy and hard-won wisdom. It wasn't an easy road, but it was worth every step. And in that moment, as the fireflies danced around us like tiny beacons of hope, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. A family united, resilient, and unbreakable.